Some of the biggest trends in the 1980s are still somewhat popular today, surprisingly. It was one of the trendiest times to be a trendsetter, so today we're going to take a look at some things that were going on. From fish in the heels to punk rock mohawks, here are 16 strangest trends from the 1980s. Number 16. The mullet. Business in the front, but a party is going on in the back. If you were alive in the 1980s, we're sure you spotted this on a daily basis. Basically, what this haircut is long in the back, but shorter and a more manageable style in the front. Normally, this style was accompanied by a mustache. The mullet has actually become forbidden in some countries such as Iran and North Korea. A mullet is actually a fish, so it's strange how it got its name. Mark Twain seemed to have come up with the reference back in the 1880s when he wrote about Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. Tom Sawyer referred to his aunt and uncle as being mullet-headed. You still might see this as a fashion statement in some of the southern states, but it's one of the worst trends to gain popularity in the 1980s. Number 15. Popped collars. If you were preppy and you were trying to look serious, you could usually do that by popping a collar. Also known as the upturned collar, this act became notably popular during the 1980s, especially by frat boys. There have been some discussions whether or not this was started by professional athletes such as a golf player or a tennis player at the time. The style was published in a book called The Official Preppy Handbook. They say that this style was not sports related, but this was just another way to let people know you were preppy. In the 2000s, this style had a resurgence, especially for those who like Abercrombie & Fitch. Number 14. The headband. It seems like all the girls back in the 1980s were rocking some kind of headband like we see here. It didn't matter if it was a rock star or a teenage girl, a majority of them were all headbanded up. Girls in the 1980s had some seriously crazy hairstyles and a lot of hair. It seemed to gain popularity in an attempt to keep all that hair under control somehow. The trend spread like wildfire and everyone was doing it. The headbands would then be used to create the most outrageous ponytails as well that were popular in the 1980s. Headbands weren't just used by the ladies either. Guys tried to pull it off too, wearing some sporty headbands across their forehead. Were people just sweatier back then or what? Number 13. Fanny packs. Some people claim that fanny packs are making a comeback, but we can all probably agree that they are just downright tacky. They look quite convenient, don't get us wrong, but they make you look like a tourist who just hopped out of a plane. They became quite trendy among the American population and were mainly made from synthetic fabrics. The fanny pack is almost worn like a belt, but some people might choose to be different and wear them a different way. Number 12. The Motorola Dynatec 8000X. Just to remind you how far we've come in the past 30 years, here's a photo of a vintage 80s brick phone that was the first cell phone available for purchase in 1983. It's hard to believe that with the types of phones we have today, owning one of these actually made you pretty cool. The very first one cost the customer $3,995 at the time. That's about the modern equivalent of $10,000. Not only was it outrageously expensive, but it weighed nearly 2 pounds. It would also take 10 hours to charge. You'd be lucky if you got an hour talk time out of that too. It was given the nickname as the brick phone due to its size and weight, and it really needed a briefcase or a backpack to be transported. We've come a long way, people. Number 11. Bright plastic earrings. These fashion statement earrings were another fashionable accessory during the 1980s and were often matched with bright colored neon type clothing. Sometimes the bigger the hoops, the cooler you were in some cases. These were also advertised to girls who thought they were quite stylish. If you're looking to dress up like a 1980s person for Halloween, be sure to include some of these. Geometric shapes such as triangles and stars were used, and even Madonna helped make these ones popular. Number 10. Mohawks. Very tall mohawks were a fashion trend in the 1980s, especially among the punk rock scene. These might have started in the 1970s but rose to popularity in the 1980s. This was basically done to look as outrageous as possible and to make people's parents regret the decision of having kids. Originally worn by the Pawnee tribe of Indians, it's a misconception that these were worn by the Mohawk Indians first. There were a few variants of mohawks worn by punk scenes in the 1980s. The most notable ones you're probably used to seeing are the Liberty spikes. These are various spikes which are often colored while the rest of the head is shaved. This was also popular across the pond in the UK. Mohawks have generally gone out of style in modern times and have been replaced with faux hawks, but you can still see some hardcore punk rockers rocking this style. Number 9. Smiley faces. We use them on a daily basis with our emoticons and whatnot, but what are the true origins of the smiley face? Could it be extraterrestrials? Some claim the ancient civilization known as the Hittites were the first ones who originally designed it in 1700 BC. Smiley faces were designed on clothing in the 1960s and 70s, but by the time the 1980s came rolling around, the smiley face was an everyday symbol seen by many. It originally had connotations with the psychedelics community, but it got cleaned up to how we see it today. They became extremely popular on clothing and pins. The smiley face was then associated with Beat This by Bomb the Bass in 1988, making it a more popular icon. Number 8. Perms. Perms were all the rage back in the 1980s for girls, mainly since this was the time for having big hair. The word perm comes from the word permanent, which involves heat and various chemicals to get this distinct look. Once again, acid perms were something that were invented in the 1970s, but then perfected in the 1980s. I'm not too much of an expert on this or anything, but the desired result seemed to be curly hair for a long period of time. Getting your perm done was like getting your nails done back then during this time, and was also just a part of everyday life. Number 7. Glamour Shots. Glamour shots, especially during the 1980s, leave many of us bewildered with confusion and sometimes sorrow. You're able to explain that he loves his cat, but why he decided to do a strange glamour shot with it like you see here in this photo is just best left unexplained. Some of the best ways to see the most awful trends of the 1980s is to take a look at the good old glamour shots here. In this photo, we have various 80 trends going on at the same time. This woman is wearing a blue gown in this photo, and not only has large flashy earrings, but also has a headband and possibly a perm going on. This gives you a good idea about fashion at the time. Number 6. Walkman. Your coolness back in the 1980s most likely depended on the coolness of your Walkman back in those times. A lot of people may have their own boom boxes and things like that, but if you had your own Walkman with plenty of cassettes, you were pretty much set. During a time when everything is so modern and sleek, many of us would cringe at the thought of listening to old 80s music on a cassette player. But that's just what they did. Sony only expected to sell about 5,000 of these a month, but demand skyrocketed and over 50,000 were sold in the first 2 months. Everyone loved that it was portable and they were able to listen to their style of music without everyone listening in. Number 5. Rubik's Cube. This legendary puzzle was designed to certainly confuse people, and it's quite the difficult task. While most people out there probably have never tried or gave up on it, a quick recent survey seemed to show that less than 1% of the population has successfully solved this puzzle. Although it was invented in the 1970s, it wasn't mass-produced until the 1980s. It became popular in many countries, and not just in the US. It was intentionally created to be rather impossible to solve, and even the person who made the Rubik's Cube took over a month to figure it out. The ones who were able to solve the puzzles were often regarded as nerdy or smart during this time. There are also 43 quintillion possible configurations of this toy. Number 4. Pac-Man. Pac-Man dominated the 80s and was one of the most popular video games played at this time. A Japanese company called Namco released Pac-Man as an arcade game in the 1980s, bringing a revolution of gaming to the US. Pac-Man became extremely popular, even though we probably wouldn't consider this game to have great graphics by today's standards. It's often regarded as one of the simplest games out there to control, but can still be quite challenging. Pac-Man remained quite popular for home gaming consoles until the 1990s. In modern times, there's still quite a bit of people crazy for this video game classic. Number 3. Tetris. Tetris was another game that emerged in the 1980s and swept the world by storm. This game was the first entertainment software ever exported from the Soviet Union to the US, and many were shocked by how popular it would become. There are many different variants to this game, but it's normally composed of assembling blocks into different formations, attempting to not leave any gaps. The Tetris trend continued to be popular up until the 1990s, when it was made available on handheld gaming systems such as Game Boy. Number 2. Goldfish shoes. Have you ever felt like taking those goldfish for a walk? This strange trend emerged with the disco scene, and it began featuring fish inside the heels of platform shoes. It's likely the trend started in the 1970s, but took place in the 80s long enough to make this list. They made an appearance in a film called I'm Gonna Get You Sucka with Chris Rock. It's not sure exactly how much of a trend they were in the 1980s because of how many were produced, but we can tell you that people were wearing these. The fish didn't come with the shoe either, and you had to buy your own. Some disco people even claim to have seen heels break with water and fish filling the dance floor. We suppose in modern times you can't put something like a tarantula in there, but just remember to give it oxygen every now and then. And number 1, the Valley Girls. The 80s seemed to be the first time people were joining cliques, and many were getting the punk, the jock, or Valley Girl association. The Valley Girl trend typically tended to refer to upper-class white girls from San Fernando Valley during the 1980s, and they seemingly changed the English language as we know it on their own. It became a trend to talk like a Valley Girl, like, whatever. The trendy Valley Girls were probably the ones who started trends such as perms and headbands, but ultimately, sending the trend on how to talk like one was what spread the most.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button for new videos every day.